Oh, that's the thing.
Hi, everybody. We had a great presentation. We did public chemists for young telephone right? Really well, right?
Oh, very well.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Raymond,
And I'm Jeff Schneider.
and we want to just kind of overview some of the things we've been doing with questions to go into quizzes in Brightspace. And I'm going to go up chat. We're going to drop in the link to this folder that everyone should be able to see. Keep in mind, there are elements in here that date back several years and include things for Blackboard. I'll reference a little bit this PDF at the bottom of this listed tutorial document that was originally generated for Blackboard, but there's some fundamental things in it that folks might find helpful. We're going to go through this set of slides here. It's out January 2025. Into hopping slides.
Yeah, I don't. I'll load up in the slideshow. Or next to it.
There we go. There we go. And I'm gonna make this a little smaller. So, like I said, we're going to talk about the types of questions and some of the hurdles and ways we use questions in Brightspace. These are the different types of questions that you can use in Brightspace. And I've broken them into two groups because this group on the left, D2L Brightspace acknowledges a way for you to create a file as a comma-separated values text file and upload any of these formulas: true, false, multiple choice, multiple choice, written response, short answer, matching, ordering. I want to highlight written response is not auto-graded. All of the rest of these question types can be auto-graded.
And we should point out that when you're writing those, Brightspace actually gives you a template to be able to do those kinds of CSV files, right? So they make that available for you.
Yeah, so you've got a model if you want to go that route that you can follow and you just put your content into. As we transition to Brightspace, what we were told was you cannot upload questions in the fill in the blank format, multiple short answer, arithmetic, or it's numerical response, and significant figures, which is also another form of numerical response. And in chemistry, we do a lot with math, and we were like, this doesn't work. And we had tens of thousands of questions from Brightspace or Blackboard yeah, that we wanted to get to Brightspace. And so a few summers ago, we started playing, and lo and behold, we figured it out. But to kind of clarify a couple of things with these two question types involving numbers, because the names D2L and Brightspace uses are really confusing. Arithmetic, 2 plus 2, and significant figures, times 10, are the question types, right? The limitation on both of these is you can only have one dependent variable, namely the answer. So if you've got a really complicated problem, you need to calculate something intermediate, can't do it. At least not writing it within Brightspace. The significant figures type of question has nothing to do with significant figures.
And it's very strange because in Blackboard, we were used to having students be able to use scientific notation to put their answers into an arithmetic problem, right? They could just go 2.2 E10 or whatever, right? Well, you can't do that in Brightspace. And so the way Brightspace says that you have to do it is you use this funky kind of inference here where you would put 2.2 in that lower box and then 10 up in that exponent box. And I'm not sure if there's some pedagogical reason for that or not. I personally think it's kind of goofy, so.
The one pedagogical advantage is you don't have to worry about students using other formats for entering scientific notation.
Yes,
Because if
right.
they didn't follow the instructions and use a capital E and a lowercase e, or
True.
they tried to type times 10 caret, you know. So this sort of enforces that they enter the coefficient and the exponent.
And do it correctly, yes. I
All right,
guess, yeah.
so scientific figures gives the students these two boxes to enter an answer in scientific notation. They cannot enter scientific notation in arithmetic set. However, and I should have pulled an example, but I didn't. If you create a significant figures question in Brightspace, it presents every numerical value in scientific notation. Okay, so if you give them pi, 3.1459, it's going to give them 3.14 times 10 to the 0 power, which is mathematically correct, but really looks confusing to a lot of students.
Yes,
And so, although we have put questions in with our method into Brightspace as significant figures to force students to use scientific notation, our method of uploading allows you to present numbers in any format you want, whether it's in scientific notation or just numerical 3.14. All right. So key thing to keep in mind, significant figures is a horrible way to take this type of problem.
Yeah.
All right. So all's not lost. What we figured out is that you can upload any question type that you want as an XML file. So those 4 formats that we highlighted you can't do, yeah, you can. You just have to load it as an XML format file. And we recognize that pulling the code apart or figuring out what that code is, most folks don't want to deal with, and we didn't want to have to deal with it all the time.
but we did,
Well, we did to figure it out the
Yes,
first time.
yes.
And what we've actually done is we've used the method that we've been using for years. We're creating questions in a spreadsheet. We just adapted how we use our spreadsheet template to put in the XML code that's required. All right.
And as a side note, this is with zero help from D2L.
And in fact, when we met with them after figuring this out and said, you know, you can do this, they're like,
They just kind of like, yeah,
really?
okay, whatever. Yeah, we'll talk to you. And then we never heard back from them, so.
So we're going to go through a couple of different examples, a few examples here of the kinds of questions you might be interested in creating and uploading that have more than one dependent variable, or that you really need to work through this alternate method we have. Multiple choice question with numbers. If you want to randomize the number of students get, each of those choices, A, B, C, D, is a dependent variable. Can't code it. Now, you could create this as a comma separated values file and upload it, right? Because we were already breaking the XML code apart, and we just went that way. All right. So in this particular question, you could vary the 3 numbers, 25, 13, 10. You can also vary, if you want, whether the operation is to add or it's to subtract. And we'll show you in the spreadsheet form kind of what we do with this and how we make it work. All right. But here is one of the kinds of questions that requires multiple dependent variables. Numeric questions. Here's an example. Notice we've been pulling things that aren't chemistry. Okay. Calculate how much interest you get. on a various account. And so within this question, you could vary the compounding period. Is it monthly? Is it yearly? Is it daily? You could vary the term, how long the account is open, the interest rate, the opening balance. And so all of these things we can set up and vary. You can use equations. You can code equations with MathML and incorporate those into your problems.
Right, and realize we didn't do all of this all at once. We developed this over years, right? And so don't think that you have to know everything and incorporate everything right away, right? This, as time goes on, you'll say, oh, I wonder if I can do, and the answer is probably yes. You just have to figure out how to do it, and that's what we did. So,
and as far as the years, this goes back to before Blackboard when we were using Angel, and we could create all of these questions within Angel directly. But sometimes it was a little tricky to be sure it was doing what we wanted. And so both Jeff and I did, and I think Jeff did as well. We used a spreadsheet to kind of make sure that we had sort of the right limits on variables and that we were, everything was working. So we were already playing in the spreadsheet world to do this. And when we left Angel and went to Blackboard and realized we can't create these questions in there because of the one dependent variable limit. It was part of the sabbatical project unplanned for me to sit down and work out how do we do this. And it was a spreadsheet, and from there, and then when we shifted from Blackboard to Brightspace, we were told, oh no, those won't work. And again, step through.
right, don't tell me you can't do something.
But in reality, as Jeff said, this is 12 to 14 years in the making. The one thing that was not available in Blackboard at all, but I realized on my last sabbatical, wait, I think we can do it in Brightspace. And that is a multiple numeric response question. So, I'm building off kind of the interest idea, we could ask the student what the interest is after 1 month of compounding, as well as what the balance is after whatever the term period is. So the students would be presented with 2 answer boxes. They would get some of the credit for getting the first answer correct, some of the credit for the second answer correct. Or if it's a stepwise problem where they have to calculate A before they can go on and calculate B, they can get some of the points for doing A correctly, even if they get the B wrong. Okay. I'll be very clear. These types of questions require an extra step because these are fill in the blank questions, which means Brightspace is grading text. And so you have to convert the range of acceptable number values into a regular expression.
And I personally have not gone this route. I've let Casey kind of play with that.
And I'll be honest, I've got it worked out. I still got to figure out how to package the Python script to make it really easy to share with anybody that's interested. But I do everything in the spreadsheet the same way. There's just an intermediate step where I take the answer values out of the spreadsheet, run them through the Python script, get regular expression values, put those into the spreadsheet before I create the X and O. And my goal, and it's pretty close, is that other than the extra step, you as a potential user of it don't have to think very hard, other than creating the spreadsheet. Okay. So we've alluded to this, but we kind of wanted to document a little bit what steps we use. And Jeff and I do these a little bit differently. He and I also have slightly different spreadsheet templates. because we worked on it somewhat independently and got to the same endpoint. But you need to create your question, identify what parts you want to vary. And any place that you want a number or a word or something to change, right? We put in a special character and we've chosen to use curly bracket. Oh, you don't use what you use.
I just put it in the, I just put it in the spreadsheet and then
Oh, I work it out.
and then I break it apart,
Okay.
and leave a blank cell for where I want to put a variable.
And ultimately, that's where I end up. I just found it easier to write the question like we normally would on a piece of paper. And then where I'm going to vary, I put in a curly bracket. And so we need 2 for each variable, because what you're going to do is break that apart in Excel. And Excel has a button that converts the text to columns where that delimited. Google Sheets uses an equation, but the good thing is you can split up and then you create the random variables, the answer values, and then you combine everything back together with the spreadsheet template with the XML, drop it into an editor. We use Substata because that's what Jeff discovered worked. And then we realized it's really kind of convenient because you paste all this text in and there's a function to make it pretty so that indents and everything look right. If there's an error in the XML, it tells you exactly what line the error is in. Yeah. And so you can backtrack and find it.
Right, and I actually use a combination of the sub-eta edit along with BB edit. And we should point out that Casey and I both do this on Mac OS. But it should work on any platform. You just have to have your text editor of choice. And it's all what you get used to. But I use a combination of both of them. Mostly I use the sub-eta edit for troubleshooting if I run into any problems or whatever. But most of the time I'll use BB edit. So.
The file has to be saved as questionvv.xml.
Which gets really confusing when you start writing a bunch of different questions because they all have exactly the same name. So what you have to make sure is that you're putting things into folders and keeping track of where everything is.
And my process is for each question I'm creating, it goes in its own folder on my hard drive.
Yep.
And that has 2 advantages. One, everything related to that question is in that one folder. And 2, the next step we have to do is add 2 things. Well, maybe 1 thing. Jeff and I are still trying to understand this. And then compress that folder into a zip file to upload. So if it's already there in one folder, it makes it really easy to compress it. This IMS manifest.xml file is required in that subfolder. There's nothing special about it. In fact, he and I just copy an old one and drop it in.
We use the exact same file every time. I've got probably, a few thousand questions and it all uses the same manifest XML file. So
I started to encounter the need for this second folder that has another XML file in it, but maybe it's just for the multiple short answer, fill in the blank. I'm still trying to work that out. It works fine with numeric. Probably it just ignores it if it doesn't need it.
right, whereas I for the questions I've uploaded, I have never, knock on wood, never had to worry about that folder.
So a couple other considerations. If you want to use HTML coding when you create your question for formatting, totally fine. But you have to escape the tags. What I mean is, so like if you wanted to do subscript, you'd use left bracket or less than, sub, greater than, how you write it in HTML. But the XML has those characters. So you have to then use ampersand, LT, semicolon, sub, ampersand, GT, semicolon, to make it work.
Right, and you know, I think we both deserve computer science degrees, because I'll tell you what, I do a lot of coding in HTML. Almost all of my questions are, and especially we're doing chemistry, you know, chemistry compounds, you need subscripts or you need superscripts or whatever. And so we learned quite a lot. So usually, and I think Casey does the same. We write all of our problems, and then we go and do global replaces. So I'll replace all the less than signs, all the greater than signs.
And that's
And-
another advantage if I write it just in a text editor first and drop it in, is I can do all the global replace on the one question, and then it drops in Excel with the right coding.
And well, and I was gonna say too, so his next line there, right, it says, instead of and degree, because, you know, sometimes we use a degree symbol lots of times. Well, it's ampersand pound 176. Now, I showed Casey just the other day, I keep a cheat sheet pasted on my wall next to my desk. Most of the time, I don't even have to use it anymore, right? I'm just, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, minus sign, that's gonna be ampersand pound 8852, right? Right. Now, the problem with doing a lot of that is sometimes even doing the global replace, you miss putting in that damn semicolon. And then you're like, oh yeah, it's fine, you know, and you go to upload it and it pukes on you and you're scratching your head. Why is this not working? Right. And that's when I use sub-etha edit a lot, because I'll pop it in there. I'll say, make it pretty. And it says, line 6, not really good. Oh, okay. Then you go fix it. So, right. So, you know, or degree C, right? Or degree F, right? There's all kinds of, and you can find these on any HTML reference page on the net. They'll give you the HTML code. They'll give you
And I think in the
universal
template,
code. And
I think in that template PDF, I got a link to the one I commonly use. But in the process now of really a couple of years figuring a lot of this out, we'll probably update that more as a Google Doc. And we'll make sure that those links are there. You can use images in the problems you upload. Okay. You have to upload the images into Brightspace separately. But the nice thing is they're absolute references, right? Which means if you say, okay, I'm going to write this question involving this set of graphs, right? You can put them in a subfolder, graphs for problem 2. And then as you write your question, you can just link to graphs problem 2, figure 1, figure 2, and it'll just grab that one directly. And you move them around, it doesn't have a problem.
right. And so, and if you've never done that before, right, you got to go to, you know, the course admin tools and let's say manage files, and then it gives you a place to upload files to. So,
And I'm going to reiterate what Jeff said. We figured this out over years, both in Blackboard and Brightspace. We're not really encouraging. We're not suggesting you try to do all of this at once.
well, and
We're trying to give you the options.
I just,
You know,
I just realized honestly, probably, what's today, Friday? Probably 4 days ago that I could use absolute file things. I was putting in entire paths for it, and it's like, it works, but it's not very useful if I want to share questions with Marty, because then he'd have to go find the absolute path, right? This way, it's just like here, pop this figure into your files and away you go. So,
so I'm gonna, before we jump into some of the examples and such, does anyone have questions right now?
Everybody,
You can unmute and ask. If nobody wants to jump in, that's fine. We'll start and kind of show you a couple of examples.
okay.
All right. So the multiple choice question, I alluded to the fact that, you can vary a whole bunch of stuff. Right? So there, the reminder of the question up there in italics, if you add 25 to 13, we subtract 10, what's the final answer? Well, what I've got written here is how I would write the question with the delimiter. All right. And although I would do this in Excel, I posted Google Sheet examples for folks to see. And this includes at least this includes my template that I use.
I think our templates are pretty close. It's just how we pull all the pieces together.
And so, I'm gonna go to this new tab creation. Here is where I dropped in that text, and I'll just so that folks can see what's going on. I'm gonna grab this text. This is not where I expect it to be. There we go.
Let's go back to slide 10.
So I would drop the question in like this, as Jeff alluded to. He would right along the way and space things out. In Sheets, you have to use the split. I'm going to split that with that delimiter. And so now it's space things out with blanks where I had variables. And so then I just use various random operators to get add or subtract 1 or 2. These 3 values all randomly changed. And then I can calculate possible multiple choice answers. I'm going to add those 3 things together. I'm going to add the first 2 and subtract the last. I'm going to subtract the first 2 and add the last, right? Or I'm going to subtract everything as my 4 possibilities. Because he and I both just sort of realized something in the last few days. We can identify what's correct. Which of these is correct based on what I chose here out of subtract. And I ended up taking that information and pulling it all back together into one cell. So the question now is pulled all back together in one cell with all the values in that row. That's what that big long equation there is the ampersand in quotes. And cat doesn't always work for me.
Okay, I was
But
gonna
the
ask,
cat
why
equation
can't
sometimes
you
works
use the
too.
cat, which is what I always do.
Yeah. And some of this I think is shifting between Sheets and Excel.
I
But
exclusively use Excel.
so do I. So, but to be able to share with all of you, we'll put it in Sheets. You get the 4 answers, identifying which is correct, which is incorrect. Ultimately, I'm going to take the question text and all these answer possibilities and get them on this tab of my spreadsheet, and that's what's going on way out here, starting in cell row column AD. So I just recreated that whole along the way. And then this part is required to get the coding right in Brightspace. Pulled it all back together, but now row 11 here is my entire question with the XML that needs to go around it and so forth. Wow. What I can do is copy row 11 to as many rows as I want. I want to make 100. I want to make 500. Jeff and I have kind of discovered that about 600 is the limit for Brightspace.
Yeah,
It starts to kind of peak when you get over 600, and some of it depends on the size of the question.
yes, I've gone to as many as 750, I think.
I've got a couple simpler questions where I had 1,000, but that's where I started running into hiccups. And so we generally run a 500 or 600,
Right,
variations of the problem.
right.
And this means that when it's deployed in a quiz to students, it's highly unlikely that anybody's going to get a duplicate question.
Well, and I've also gone so far as to what sometimes when I'm writing a question, I'll see how many variables I have, and I'll calculate how many permutations there are to know that, hey, if I have 600 copies, that might be way too many. Maybe I only need 250, right? And so I sort of limit myself that way sometimes. So
I've got a field here where you can give the problem a name so that when it loads into Brightspace, it's something that's identifiable to you. The default points per question is you can enter. And ultimately, you copy and paste this to as many rows as you want. You got to take this little bit, drop it at the end. And it's this little bit that you copy and paste into an editor to get ready to upload. Okay. My point being, the real work is in the spreadsheet. Working through your variables, working through how you go about this. All right.
and I would point out that I think multiple choice problems are probably the most difficult to keep track of when doing it this way.
Because
Right.
there's all these answers.
There's just so much going on. Just writing a straight up arithmetic question or a significant figure question, a lot easier.
Yep.
Right,
Which is
because
the-
you get one answer, boom, there it is.
Which is what the second example is. Go back to the interest question. And so we posted an example here. Now, there's more field possibilities. Same thing, we can give it a title, so it's easy to find. Because it can be arithmetic or significant figure, that whole scientific notation thing, I've created in the template a dropdown so that you can pick whether it's arithmetic or significant figures. So this one template works for both types of problems. Default points. In the numeric questions, you can tell it whether the answer should be based on numbers of decimal places or numbers of significant figures. Correct significant figures this time.
Yes,
And so, this is programmed in as a dropdown to be decimal places or significant figures to go into the XML correctly to get a choice. You can enforce that or not. I'm speaking for Jeff as well. We rarely enforce the decimal places or significant figures.
and I will say generally, I will almost always write a question that is decimal places type. But I'll ask them to present an answer to X number of significant figures. Now, that means maybe I'll say to 3 significant figures, but if one of their answers could be 153, let's say, and the other is 49.2, those are both 3 significant figures. But now my decimal places are wrong. So what I do in my spreadsheet, I have a separate column to tell me how many decimal places to use, and then I'll put that into the final XML. So I'll have a variable number of decimal places for for questions.
I often will just tell students, report your answer to, let's say, 2 decimal places. I'll default this to 3 just to cover my bases. So if they see the correct answer, it'll be the 3. But I often don't show them the correct answer either. So it varies, but I almost never enforce this, because if you enforce it, the student's penalized for not following the directions, so to speak, even if they did it correctly.
Well, and I don't generally enforce that technically, but in fact, we do enforce it because we give them a tolerance, right? So they've got to get it pretty close, right? And so we give them that tolerance, whether it's as a percent or as units.
Can it vary by plus or minus 1, or is it varying by 3%? 3% is kind of my default for most things. But you can take whether it's a unit or a percentage, an absolute or a relative tolerance, and what that value is. You can add question feedback that goes in for every question. But once again, I have now a single line. Yeah, see, this didn't concat
Okay,
correctly.
yeah,
But I have a single line where it's got the question text and my answer. And that's coming about from here, where I created the question with the different variables and the possibilities. I've got my different parts to go into the equation, and there's my answer. And so it's really all about getting this created in your spreadsheet. Because once you've got it there, it's just pulling it together and getting it in the format that Brightspace wants. And then upload from there. Oh, so this tab people shouldn't play with, but this is all the XML pieces and parts that I use to try and figure out, okay, what do I need? What do I have to change? So on and so forth. So how do you do this? Like I said, start with just working in a spreadsheet in a single row, kind of creating variables. Start simple. Vary 2 numbers, vary 1 number. That tutorial document PDF has some of that information in it. I'll show you in a second. Jeff and I are happy to share Excel templates. But we'll probably want to meet with you and kind of talk through what they actually mean
Right.
and how you use them.
I was gonna say, I'd be happy to sit down with you.
Yep.
And do it. It's easier to just sit down and do it.
So this is that tutorial PDF that I do need to update. A lot of stuff fill out Blackboard. Partway through the document, it gets into creating this question, right? And talking about how you randomize numbers. Right. So here's the equations we typically use to create random numbers. Right. And so the later parts of this document are still relevant to you because it's all about how we use the spreadsheet to create the problems that they're in.
And we should probably have degrees in Excel, but we only know probably 10% of what Excel can do. But that's a huge amount, because Excel is, I think, very powerful.
And so once you get the XML file you want to load, right, you go to quizzes, question library, and you just do import, upload a file. And you upload that zip file, and it ends up in a folder. And each line is a question. Now, you might be looking at this going, holy cow, we see the whole question. That's because I was lazy and I didn't give it a question title.
I never do.
I almost never give it a question title either. But if you really want, you could say this question type number 1, number 2. I just leave it, and which means then in Brightspace, you see the whole big list.
Well, and for me, it's easier because then I don't have to remember, what did I mean when I gave it that question title.
Yeah.
Oh, it's this question, okay.
And so here's a question that I alluded to where there's multiple numeric responses. I got two answer boxes. To be capitalized.
KB.
Oh, that case should be capitalized. There.
Would it be possible to do a question where the answer box is in the text
Yes,
rather than at the bottom?
yes. So, in that case, you would really do a fill in the blank question. Because with a fill in the blank question, you can write the text of the question, give it an answer box, and then you can write more text. And so that is totally doable. Let's do this. Let's do that. All right, so I'm going in to edit this question. And, oh, this is set up as a multiple short answer. That way I want. Test fill in the blank. So test fill in the blank. So fill in the blank question, you notice I've got a box for text 1. And then I have blank 1, which is my first answer. And then I have another text box. And then I have another answer box. And you can see here, this is where I said regular expression. And so this is expecting any answer between 0 and 9. And this was a question I put in Brightspace. I wrote it in Brightspace, exported it, and then started looking at what the XML programming code was and tearing it apart to be able to make a template so that I could upload it back
Right,
up.
and this is really how we did all of it. We downloaded each type. Opened up the XML and tore it apart. We reverse engineered it.
Yep.
So,
And there are certainly elements of the XML that we don't fully understand the options. But we occasionally learn things, and in fact, for multiple choice, we learned something just this week. That here in the XML, let's see if there's render choice shuffle. If you say yes there, which my template is by default now, it randomizes the order of the answers, yeah, for whatever question. We said no, answer 1, answer 2, answer 3 are always going to be the same. The one advantage of this is you don't have to randomize the order of the answers you create. Which we used to have to do.
right, that's
It's a nightmare.
it is a nightmare. So,
Understanding the XML, it's a tag, we flip it from no to yes and boom. Caveat, there's ways to change how fill in the blank or multiple short answer gets graded. I learned over the summer that if you change how it's graded, it changes the XML code and you have to start over. I was shocked when the XML code changed when I changed how it was graded.
interesting.
So there's still stuff for us to learn. If folks have a particular type of question you really are interested in, we're happy to try and walk through the possibilities with you. If you're really proficient with Python, I think you could script a lot of this in Python and it would do it for you. If you're proficient with R, I know Nick Sard used R a lot to create questions in Blackboard. I know if it's just a matter of getting the XML coding correct, and you could use R to generate questions. So there's multiple ways to go about this. This is the way we settled on. And we're happy to help people. And you come to us and say, I'd really like to do. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is give me an example question that you want to do and what things you want to vary.
Yep, and then we'll change it.
And then we'll start kind of walking through the spreadsheet part of it with you. The next step we're going to probably say to you is just make spreadsheets. Just work on a spreadsheet and get everything in a single line where you've got the variables and the answers calculated. and then we can help you get it into Excel.
Now I wanted to also say that thankfully, Brightspace for D2L sort of changes things at a glacial pace. So that these XML templates should be good for a long time, right? So, right there, they're not gonna be quick to change any of that, so.
We only have 5 in the mix.
Yeah.
You will have 1.
And Michael, I hope we did answer your question that yes, you can put text boxes in the middle of text. I know we didn't show a complete example, but hopefully for right now, just knowing that
Yes,
the
thank
answer is
you.
yes, should be good. I hope. Anybody else?
And I guess just in ending, the regular expression part of it, doing the numbers is kind of crazy, but it does work. Jeff and I actually used regular expressions at the end of last semester in our general chemistry lab to auto grade introduction and summaries for lab report. So we didn't have to wait until final week for students to submit stuff. They submitted it right during class. And Brightspace auto graded it looking for specific terms. And as long as those terms were there, they got credit.
Right, because that part really isn't a writing part. It's just we want you to have those things in your introduction, whether you wrote it well or wrote it poorly, didn't matter as long as you had the key points in there. So.
So I have something like organized thing. Obviously, I want so I want to have like maybe somebody really wants it.
Yep. Yep, easy. Oh, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
That's exactly how we deploy it. You know, we've got
Right, and so in Excel, we would just say X is the opposite of B, plus or minus, and we code all that, right? And so, then you change the variables that you want to put in there, it spits out the answer for you, or answers, I guess, right? So, if you got plus and minus. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, well, and I like that you said you're not a math teacher, but, right, so I teach algebra every class period in Gen Chem, or at least in Gen Chem 2, right, and so. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. If there are no other questions, we'll just go ahead and stop recording.
Yep.
All right, thanks, folks.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you.